everyone, and so if you didn't watch my update video, I basically said in that vid that I want to start doing book readings, mainly ones involving paganism, the paganism I belong to. Now before I get into the book reading and all that stuff, I just want to say I'm a Reconstructionist heathen, meaning that individuals like us honor the Norse gods as well as their ancestors. It's practice based in history and historical fact. Meaning, for example, Reconstructionists don't believe in the Nine Worlds, or Valhalla, or Folkvanga. We also don't believe in Loki or his children. That's just a generalized statement, and when I say we, I don't mean like a kinship kind of thing, it's just as a general statement. So, the first book I'm reading today is The Heathen Journal, Volume 1. I'm going to be branching this series out a little bit. The book is only 45 pages, but I want to read like certain bits until, I want to separate it. So in this volume, we have the editor's note on the first volume. We have Foreward. And then for the articles, we have Reconstruction in Modern Heathenry, an introduction, Women in Heathenry, what we find beyond the literature, some animal imagery in Anglian heathenry, Frankish heathenry, an overview, sacred groves in Germanic and Scandinavian heathenry. Then we have an afterwards. So I'm going to try to read the editor's note, Foreward, and Reconstruction in Modern Heathenry. Okay, the editor's note. Enjoy the inaugural issue of the Heathen Journal, the first journal by and for heathen reconstructionists. What is a heathen reconstructionist, really, though? That is perhaps the primary goal of the first issue, to set the pace of what sort of journal this will be. So instead of reading an explanation on it in the first note, just look within. Hopefully by the time you've read this first issue, we will have a solid understanding of what our definition of the term. I can claim sole responsibility for the name, unlike the rest of the contents in this journal. I named it what I did because in the lore, that's the name of the biggest cauldron that held the meat of poetry and wisdom. If you drink from it, you become wise. Yes, it's pretentious as hell, but I don't care. It's poetic. I am the executive editor. It's my baby. This magazine was my idea, and I've been working on putting the whole thing together. But all that means really is that I've begged, pleaded, and cajoled a whole lot of people who are a whole lot smarter and more talented than me. These folks have submitted articles, book reviews, artwork, photos, and other items, which have been arranged in an aesthetically pleasing manner to what you now have before you. We're not sure how often it will come out. So far, just know it's at least biannual. I've managed to wrangle articles from some of the brightest minds in heathen reconstruction, and their work has been reviewed by an editing team. This is the high bar. Individuals with 40-plus years in heathenry, and academics with degrees in Old Nordic religion and history, who work closely with leading scholars in the field. And all that said, I believe what we put together is something for everyone involved to be proud of, and for every heathen to enjoy. Not only have we put together this sweet journal, we're disseminating it freely to all at no charge. So enjoy the journal, pass it around, discuss it, email us with your questions or suggestions. Perhaps you'd like to submit an article. We hope to grow and excel as time goes on, and as with any journal, the readership will be a key part of that. Okay, here's the foreword. The state of modern American heathenry. Heathenry circa 1995 had become a hodgepodge of neo-paganism, where one could choose which god's hall one would die into and bide his or her time until reincarnation kicked in. One walked the path working with various deities until he had developed a personal relationship with more gods than the next guy. Everyone was either a gothy or one in training, and one knew each god's favorite drink, so that offerings and toasts could be in proper fashion. Every third person was either an expert rune reader or had developed an intimate relationship with his totem fetch. so that nightly travels through the nine worlds were common as chimichangas in the local mini mart. Much precious forum time was filled with some regaling as of flying among Valkyries and dragons. The other side of the heathen coin was the bride brigands, who were so obnoxious that they were banned repeatedly, only to reincarnate with some other fake Old Norse name 2 weeks later. The mid to late 90s were irritating to say the least. Between 95 and 97, I'd run across a tiny handful of folks interested in historical heathenry. In general, we slowly left email lists because we couldn't excite folks in the neo-heathen could, like the neo-heathens could. Most of us became irritated with all the fluff and left in a huff. Those who were looking to follow a spiritual path and have a personal relationship with were running the show. In 2000 CE, I started questioning everything in modern heathenry. Starting with Germanic spirituality, which directly questioned the rampant borrowing from Wicca, SCA, and Native Americans. I purposely exposed many of the sources of this information only to catch flack from the more popular side of neo-heathenry. The neo-heathens held their high ground. Officially, I quit Asatru in 2012 and was a very lonely, somewhat rejected, and ejected from the mainstream heathenry. 2003. I started lurking on asatru.org. Some of my fellow New Mexicans were there, and I was getting lonely with the heathen company. What I saw there was the rise of a new breed of heathen, young heathens of a completely different caliber. They not only have voice, but a loud one at that. 2004, I signed up under the pseudonym of Parallel Lines 2000. But after about six months, my cover was blown. Not only had people read my stuff, but they were doing the same thing I was. They were researching various topics because they were actually interested in it and wanted the same thing as me. They wanted historical heathenry brought to fore, and they wanted a modern form of heathenry compatible with the historical fact, but also compatible with the life in the 21st century. What really drew me back into actively participating as a heathen, though, was that many of them only had 2-3 years as a heathen behind them, and they were already where I was at in 30 years of being a heathen. It was as if they were on an accelerated track. In my 32 years as a heathen, this was a breed that I'd never seen before. They took an active interest in bringing historical heathenry into the 21st century, rather than making up a 21st century version based on neo-paganism. They actually wanted to look at historical fact and discuss it. They separated themselves out as real wheat heathen from the chaff fluff, and then had the audacity to reject the chaff fluff vehemently. The rationale was, and remains, to acclaim as much as possible. And when chaff showed up in the forum, there was a resounding collective cry raised up. Where is the source of your claim? And they have a name. They are Reconstructionists. Reconstructionism isn't anywhere but in heathenry. Isn't new anywhere but in heathenry. I'm busy. I'm sorry about that. It's been around for quite a while among other quieter groups like Remuva, some of the Hellenistic group Jews, and even Christians. But for whatever reason, the spark was fanned into flame among heathens between 2012 and 2004. Reconstructionism is no longer an asatru.org phenomenon, but has cross-pollinated into other fora on the net. This new breed hasn't always been heartily welcomed either. But it is persistent and the presence is there, and I, for one, can honestly say that I not only am glad to be a part of it, but also am proud to do so. Sorry about that. Reconstructionism is a topic and always sure to raise at least some eyebrows. Gets the heart pumping no matter which camp one belongs to. Depending on the group, however, it can either be vinegar in the wine or the fruit of the vine. Now, on to the question. Why does the greater presence of Reconstructionists in modern heathenry make heathenry better than it was a decade and a half ago? I was originally given the task to write a piece on the state of heathenry, but to answer the question, I would like to explain why this approach appeals to me as well as others. First, I'd like to say that the term Reconstructionist heathen is really two terms, Reconstructionist and heathen. For example, I am both a Reconstructionist and a heathen. I wasn't always, though. For almost 25 years, I was just a heathen. In fact, when I first ran across an email conversation between several people who were having a discussion regarding death into the grave mound, rather than dying into the halls of the favorite god, I was appalled. It was another 2 years before I could understand that today we're talking about, and only after that was I able to take this method of investigation and gaze into my own cultural past. Before I go any further, let me present this story. For any who are new here, for any who know me, you know that I can never discuss anything without telling stories. I am a traditional dulcimer player, along with a lot of other instruments, but for this discussion I stick with dulcimer. Now, the dulcimer is an old-time instrument which plays technically out of only one key. If you know anything about music, however, you will know that any key in the chromatic scale is also 7 modes which go by handy names such as mesolidine, ionine, I can't read those, Dorian, and a few others that I don't even know how to tune into. Now, the weird thing about a dulcimer is that it only has 8 notes to the octave rather than 12 like a guitar or a banjo. Having only 8 notes somewhat limits what one can do and cannot do. But the most amazing thing about working with a set of limitations is that the dulcimer really isn't that limited. I have heard jazz, rock tunes, old-time swing, and even classical music played on a so-called limited instrument. In fact, the instrument isn't really limited at all. It's just that the player himself is required to be creative and, of course, is required to know both the instrument and the music he's trying to play. Now, I've played dulcimer since 1978, but only a Reconstructionist since 1995. When I ran across the discussion mentioned above, I still held to the idea that heathenry, like neo-paganism, plug-and-play religions, and it could be anything that I wanted it to be. What I wanted was a heathen dulcimer that had all 12 modern tones, like a guitar played in the lap, instead of being limited to 8. The limitation is in the player, not the instrument. Early on, we all wanted to believe that interpretation of the lore was simple. We discounted the idea that perhaps the worldview may have been different, or we decided that we must use our modern worldview to interpret because we were modern folk. The new crew of Reconstructionists didn't seem to buy it, however. They wanted to know what their ancestors were thinking. They saw the modern worldviews as an impediment to understanding, i.e., a limitation. Reconstructionism does not belong solely to heathens. Rudolf Simek is a Catholic theologian who has made a career out of delving into ancient Germanic heathenry. Being a Reconstructionist, then, only requires one thing: that one takes a scientific approach to heathenry, whatever else is reconstructing, to understand how the makers reconstructed the thing in the first place and how they understood it, felt about it, and interacted with it after it was created. Being a Reconstructionist requires no belief. In fact, belief can only be a hindrance to understanding the data in hand. Belief can interfere greatly with the interpretation of facts. To be a good Reconstructionist, one must be able to step away from one's cultural background as well as spiritual background. I started as a Reconstructionist in 1995, became committed to it in 1997. But by that time there were a number of heathen customs which had become accepted as historical fact. The hammer rite, the eightfold calendar, rune casting, reading, seed as neo-shamanism, the pop American form of reincarnation, old souls, walk-ins, even UFOs. Nigel Pinnock had published his book on runic astrology, and everyone else seemed to be jumping onto the bandwagon. Mondays were especially interesting, since the X-Files had aired the night before. The plot of the show dictated the direction of the email discussion. Back in '95, modern heathenry looked no more like historical heathenry than did Catholicism, Wicca, or Buddhism. At that time, creating elaborate rites had become far more important than historical fact. Both common sense and historical fact had become a burden to creativity. It had been all but dispensed with to make room for the Scully and Mulder's newest I want to believe discovery of the night before. My second foray into experimental anthropology, archaeology, was based on the following question. How did the ancient Germanic peoples make bread? That was then followed by the next question. How did they figure out how to make cheese? 15 years down the line, I now know the answer to both questions, and engaged in making a nice loaf of wheat rye sourdough bread, made by my own sourdough starter yesterday, and it should be ready for cutting today. Yesterday I engaged in participating in my own cultural heritage, which for me is far more spiritual act than reading runes on scribbling out the script of a way cool Oh-thur-or-ear. Participating as a fine upstanding member in my own long line of German cultural heritage is far more important than me that was 15 years ago. Reconstructionism still isn't really popular among a handful of people, mainly because they feel that by sticking to historical facts somehow, creativity is stifled. Although there was a time when I'd have that, I don't think that now. I think the reason that these folks feel this way is because they've never asked themselves the right questions. Most likely they continue to do what I had done for my first 25 years as a modern heathen, which is to first generate an answer and then create a question for it. Which now brings me back to my first personal foray in experimental anthropology archaeology, i.e. Reconstructionism. What if what I had perceived as gaps weren't really gaps at all, but were just thought to be gaps because I had something similar in some other religion? Maybe I just thought the hammerite had to be there to make the ground sacred for the plot, and that because Wiccans and Native Americans did something along these lines, we heathens must have had something comparable. Rather than look at how land, particularly cultivated land, was viewed and treated by early Germanic people, I assumed the answer, we needed sacred space, and got busy generating such a thing should look. That line of questioning led me to the conclusion that I had no understanding of the ancient Germanic heathen's mindset, his worldview, and so I set about the task learning it all, thinking that it would take me but a few months or so. 15 years later, I'm still at it. Still think there is no need to fill the gaps, and I'm still learning to play heathen tunes on this old instrument we call modern heathenry. This now seems to be the standing for the new Reconstructionists. This new guard has also built in some safe measures, for example, objectivity. Nice concept, but it's not completely possible. If we learn about our own worldview first and understand how many of our limitations, we can go a long way toward objectivity, but not completely. How far can we step outside our own convictions without falling completely apart, or ending up like a Zen master who's found nirvana? Even the Zen master knows the first thing there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is. Reconstruction is a step from the 21st century back to the 8th, but at some point they must return, albeit somewhat altered, to the 21st. The interpretation is everything, and to ensure that at least some type of objectivity is taking place in our own interpretations, we compare notes with others who are engaged in the same process, and remain willing to admit that our own interpretations just might be wrong. Something that's really not possible 20 years ago. Real discussion, rather than weak attempts to impress, become the standard. Heathenry, real heathenry, that is related to a natural extension of historical heathenry, now has a chance to grow and flourish in the modern era. These are borrowing from neo-pagans and Odroerir, Odroerir, 10, the New Age groups, is slowly coming to a grinding halt. These borrowed traditions are being culled out as unnecessary and unacceptable to the new Reconstructionists on the one hand, while new art, music, literature, and philosophies are at the same time being built upon the foundation of historical Germanic heathenry. Heathenry is no longer another alternative religion, but has become an entire way of living, complete with its own native worldview. Past 8 years or so, heathenry has grown up and matured on its own. There are, of course, some things that would never that most would prefer to not reconstruct in the 21st century, such as slavery, exposing children, raping and pillaging, and carving a blood eagle, which is false. But there is no longer anything preventing us from asking about it and exploring it as historical fact and from looking at what purpose these traditions might have served. We don't need to deny that these things may have existed historically within our own cultural heritage. I live in the 21st century. I drive a truck. I work in the medical field. I own a computer. I get a flu vaccine every year because my job requires it. In fact, I'm sitting in my office at work, dictating the short piece on Reconstructionism 101, directly into my computer using a speech recognition program packed into my Linux. Heard a fellow say on the radio, follow a worldview to its natural conclusion, then decide whether you can live with that. We have and we can. I started this thing out by saying that modern heathen Reconstructionists, a more correct version of the term, brings us Reconstructionists to greatest of satisfaction. It's true that we Reconstructionists do what we do because it makes modern heathenry a pleasure for us. We don't feel a need to fill in the gaps or bring heathenry up to date any longer because we know the historical heathenry is alive and doing well in the 21st century. Of all the things I've done in my life, which is quite a bit, adding the approach of Reconstructionism to being heathen and joining others who are doing the same thing has brought me the most satisfaction. Shortly, I'll leave here and go home to eat a sandwich of homemade liberkis and homemade mustard on homemade sourdough bread. I'll be participating in my own cultural heritage through the fruits of my research. Perhaps after that, I'll knock off a few tunes on the old dulcimer before knowing that I actively contributing to my cultural heritage, which extends all the way back in the archaeological record to the faint beginnings of Germanicy. Lastly, the state of modern heathenry. It's not only alive and well, but it's taking a level of excitement like never before. The state of modern heathenry. Healthy and getting healthier. I did say I was going to read Reconstructionism and the Modern Heathenry, but I'm going to stop here and read it next time. Now, let me know what you think. Was it confusing? Like, do you kind of understand what's going on? Or are you just interested? And if you're a new heathen and you're trying to learn, you see my video, let me know what you thought. And I'll see you next time in another video. Goodbye.